Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I just finished an incredible conversation with Reverend Brandan Robertson of the Sunnyside Reformed Church in New York City. And he has just written a book coming out in May. And guess what? One lucky subscriber is going to win his book. We're going to give that book away after the episode airs, but make sure that you subscribe to be eligible to win.
A very, very commentary.
First of all, I would love to tell people all about who you are. And you are an author, you are the pastor of Sunnyside Reformed Church in New York City. And your latest book is called Queer and Christian. And I'm just so fascinated by all of it because I grew up Catholic in a Midwestern family, 7 children. And then I moved out west when I was about 23, 24 years old. So I took with me some of those Midwestern Catholic values, but as soon as I got to the West Coast, things changed and I became much more liberal in my way of thinking. And even though I always kind of was, I became much more liberal when I moved to the West Coast and since then have really changed my views a lot about Catholicism and organized religion, if you will.
Yeah.
And so reading some of the things that you've done and a lot of excerpts from your book, I'm just fascinated, like, of your story. So could you start by just telling a little bit about your story and how you evolved into what you're doing now?
Totally. Well, yeah, thank you so much again for having me here and sharing a bit of your background. Similarly, I feel like so many of us grew up in kind of cultures that were a little bit more conservative. I wasn't religious growing up, but I grew up in a trailer park in Maryland with general, like, conservative vibes. And I started going to church with my neighbors when I was 12, and I was a 12-year-old that had lots of mental health issues, anxiety, depression because of the turbulence of my upbringing. And so when I started going to church and found a community that welcomed me and heard a message of a God who had a plan for my life and cared for me, that really touched my young heart and drew me in. And I would say I had a conversion experience, an encounter with what I knew as Jesus at the time, and it really changed everything for me. Not that my mental health issues and home situation, none of that changed, but my outlook changed because I believed God was with me and God had a plan for me. And within a few months of that kind of conversion experience, I felt a sense of calling, wanting to give my life to help others have the same experience that I had. And of course, I was in a conservative evangelical context. So at the time, that meant being Republican. That meant being pro-Israel. That meant being anti-gay and anti-abortion. It had all these things that were tied to it that I just adopted because that's what the people in my community were saying was what Christianity was. But it wasn't really till I went off to college to study to be a pastor at the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago that I started walking off of the campus where we were learning conservative Christian theology and into the city of Chicago. And the way I've said it is that we kept experiencing God in places God wasn't supposed to be, meaning we thought
Wow.
Catholics were evil, right? We really did. We were taught that the Catholic Church was a false church, but me and my friends went and hung out at Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago and were amazed at the beauty of the Catholic service and how much it felt like God's presence was there. And then we would go to Boys Town and not having any fun or going to any bars or anything like that, but like to share the gospel with people. But we would experience LGBT people that were so lovely and so obviously connected to a higher power and knew the same kind of love that we had experienced. And it was that experience of God in all those places that God wasn't supposed to be that began shifting both how I identified and allowing me to come out as gay, but also changed just my politics, my religious beliefs, and all of that. It made me question, as you said, kind of the institutionalized religion that had made me so afraid of everybody who thought and lived differently than us.
It's interesting. Well, you said that you were, in your adolescence when you started finding church. Was that because your parents had wanted you to go there, or was that because you found it on your own through a friend? You just decided to go to church. How did that come about? Because a lot of young kids uh, are forced to go to church because their parents do, but to do that on your own assertion is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds more altruistic looking back than it probably was. My parents weren't religious, but I really just wanted an excuse. My friends went to church in downtown Baltimore, and we lived in a suburb. And so they said, "Hey, do you want to come to the city with us on Sundays and go to church?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great. Let's get out of the neighborhood." But it really was, and this is kind of the tension in my mind. This was a very conservative church, like fundamentalist Baptist. But the welcome I experienced as a 12-year-old in this church of people that were glad to have me there, that were excited that I was coming and attending their church, was something that I had not really experienced in my life up to that point. I was a shy, nerdy, closeted gay kid and was very much on the edge of like the social groups in my school and in the community. And so to be in a church where they were like, we are just glad you're here. You don't have to believe, you don't have to conform. We're
A
just
sense
glad
of
you're here.
belonging. You had a
Yeah,
sense of belonging.
it
And so
changed everything.
when you were obviously hearing the scriptures and it came upon that those scriptures that were very much against homosexuality, but yet you were dealing and struggling with your own identity at that point. How did you deal with that? Because that's a lot of people not only struggle because they're coming out as gay, but then to have to struggle with your faith. I mean, I can't even imagine how ostracized you would feel at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it was all the more traumatic, I think, in my situation because my family wasn't religious and the religious community became my salvation in a very real sense. Like it helped my mental health, it helped all of these things. And then you're right. I mean, I heard from the pulpit often that the gay agenda was threatening the foundations of our country and it was an antichrist agenda. And while I didn't know, I wouldn't have used the word gay as a 13-year-old to describe myself, I had a sense that it was referring to me. And I mean, the long story short is I spent 15 years. I mean, I did conversion therapy. I did everything I could to be straight. I dated the head of our cheerleading team at the church's private school. Like I
So
tried.
you tried to conform into heterosexuality,
Yeah.
right?
And obviously, I mean, the story that you hear from me and so many others is that you can try and try and try, but at the end of the day, nothing was changing. And that's what I had to come face to face with was, why am I being accepted for being dishonest rather than being who I am and being out in public, which is precisely what the faith calls us to be honest and authentic in who we are. And that was part of what led me on this long journey to become an openly gay Christian pastor.
It's very fascinating to me too because growing up Catholic, I remember in the church that I went to, there was this, the crucifixion hung there, and then or the Jesus on the cross, and then there was this big saying that what I am with you always, those who come to me will know everlasting life. It wasn't those who come to me who are not gay, who are, so in my doctrine, personal doctrine, I've had issues, um, as much as I love the Catholic Church, and for a lot of what it stands for, I have problems with it. And I also feel like we are judging each other when at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is who's judging you at the end of this life.
Yep.
We judge each other so often, but we don't, we, we really, it doesn't matter what I think. I have no authority to judge anyone. Who am I to judge who is right, wrong, politically, sexually, gender wise? What I have no right. God has the right.
Yep.
And at that point, I was talking earlier with a friend, and we were saying that, you could be a murderer, you can do horrific things, and God might forgive you for that when you are, judged at the end of the day.
Yep.
But if you're gay, you're not,
Yep.
because you love another human being that happens to be of the same sex, you're now going to hell for that. Like, to me, there's just no it's nonsensical.
Yeah. And I'm with you. I mean, I think I've done a lot of work. I'm in a PhD program studying sexuality in the Bible. And one of the things that I keep stumbling upon is how this became such a big issue for Christians. And it's actually, I mean, for most of our 2,000-year history, homosexuality was not a thing Christians were debating about or even fighting over and excluding people about. It really was in the 1960s and 70s when the religious right was formed, which is conservative Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, aligning with the Republican Party, that there are literal documents that show that they chose the issues of abortion and homosexuality because they knew it would trigger what is called the ick factor, right? If you're a straight man in the South who's never met a gay person and you all of a sudden are hearing about gay sex all the time, it's an emotional reaction. The same thing with showing a picture of an aborted fetus. And it was a really powerful tool to get people to conform to a political ideology, but it's actually not good scripture analysis. It's not good theology. And that has been really disheartening to me in my own faith journey because it's political, not religious conviction.
Well, that's interesting. It's something I wanted to ask you about for my own knowledge as well, and I'm sure anybody listening. I don't really, as a Catholic, we didn't really study the Bible. We listened to scripture, gospels, the readings, um, because I went to Catholic schools and, there's catechism and all that, but we didn't really study the Bible. So, as far as scriptures go, can you debunk what are some of the scriptures? Like, you don't have to name them all, but I'm sure there's quite a few. And I know probably in Genesis and there's one in Romans, I think Corinthians, there's a few that talk about homosexuality. They say, my problem with it, and I'm going to let you answer that in a second, is there are so many versions of the Bible. It is 2,000 years old. There are so many theologians that will interpret the Bible in different ways. What do you say about that? And what are those scriptures that are still being talked about today?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. And what's, again, so perplexing to me is the scholarly consensus among theologians and Bible scholars for 50 years has been that the Bible does not condemn homosexuality. And yet, most lay people in the church never hear that. And that's just I mean, it's a condemnation, especially for Protestants who do make the Bible the center of our faith. Um, People just don't know what the scholarship says. And quite simply, there are 6 verses in the Bible that people say reference homosexuality. The first thing to note, the word homosexuality, the concept of sexual orientation, came about in the 1800s. So it's absolutely impossible and wrong if any Bible translation uses the word homosexual because nobody in the first century knew that word. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And just, I mean, the big summary, it's actually really simple. And there are thousands of pages of scholarship about this in the ancient world, men who were citizens of any empire were permitted to have sex with anyone they wanted who was a lower social status. So that meant they could have sex with their wives, they could also have sex with their female slaves and their male slaves. And there was no legal consequence for raping folks. There was nothing because you were the powerful male with all the rights. And in the Roman society that Paul the Apostle, for instance, was writing about in Romans chapter 1, for instance, it was so common for men to go out and sexually exploit and abuse their male slaves who were often 12 to 20 years old. And this was widespread across the Roman Empire. It was widespread in the ancient Near Eastern world of the Old Testament. And the best scholarship suggests that when the Bible is talking about same sex relationships, it's not two people who are in love, who have the same social status, who are equals in a relationship, but a man with more power exploiting a man with less power for his own sexual gratification or for a sense of superiority. So the Bible is condemning sexual abuse. And what's really remarkable, especially with all we've learned about the Catholic Church in recent years, is that the Bible's been condemning sexual abuse of older men to younger people for 2,000 years, and yet we've made it about two gay people who love each other rather than sexual abuse of minors, which is the very thing the Bible's been condemning, and the Catholic Church in particular has been so guilty of in the past 50 years.
Right. And I think they're confusing also love with procreation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to reduce relationships down to you must have a child, of course, excludes so many straight people. It excludes people who have infertility, and it's just an absurd argument that actually nobody believes except when they apply it to homosexuality, because the Catholic Church doesn't actually condemn people who are infertile, and yet that same logic is the very same thing that's being
Well,
used
and
to.
the Catholic Church has evolved over the many years as well. Even in my life, I've seen many things that have changed, even in the scriptures
Yeah,
that have changed, or in the readings in the church that I sometimes can't even go along with it because I now don't just go to Catholic Church. I go to different denominations all the time because I want to be fulfilled when I go to church, and I find I can be fulfilled when I go to a Catholic church, but I've been for so many years going to Catholic church that I feel like I've heard these same gospels over and over again, and some of the homilies are nice to hear, but however, I like to go and listen to beautiful music, and more modern music. I like to go and listen to a married pastor talk about life. I like to go and just I think not I get a lot out of non-denominational
sure.
services because I feel it relates to my life. I can I you know Priests are very different. They live a very different, more cloistered life,
Yeah,
obviously, and than the normal layperson does, right?
totally.
But I do find that the Catholic Church is changing a little bit. I wondered how you felt about Pope Francis and his softening on some of the stances of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say my good friend is Father Jim Martin, who is one of kind of the top, more progressive LGBT inclusive priests in the country. And Pope Francis and him have worked together over the past few years to really try to move to make the Catholic Church more accepting. I understand Pope Francis's challenge. Pope Francis isn't responsible for the American Catholic Church. He's responsible for Catholics across Africa and across the global
Yeah.
south and everywhere. So it doesn't make a lot of strategic sense for him just to decree homosexuality is not a sin, even if he might believe that, and I don't know what he believes. But so I don't envy his position, but I do admire the fact that he has moved a lot to at least allow same-sex couples to be blessed by priests, to say they should be welcomed in in Catholic services and have their children baptized. And I think it is monumental change for the Catholic Church, even if it's not where I would want it to be as an LGBT Christian. So it's a hopeful sign for sure.
It is a hopeful sign. And again, when we kind of go on to that whole theory of when you love someone, that should not be a crime
Yeah,
to love somebody. There's so many other problems in this world, and to be condemned to not be able to practice your faith and be ostracized is something that I just find kind of evil.
yeah,
It's an evil concept, and people that suggest or who believe that, like I was thinking earlier, the church that I grew up in, if a gay couple walked down the center aisle for mass, I'm sure there would be half of the congregation would be like, "Oh my, like
yeah,
what are you doing here?" kind of thing, and half would be accepting. I
yeah,
would believe at this point in time, like this day and age.
yeah.
Um, but it's a scary thing. It would be scary to show up at mass hand in hand with your partner if you were if you were in the gay community.
Yeah. I agree with you. And I think, I mean, part of the thing that is the most perplexing is Christianity is dying in the Western world. Our churches, all of them uniformly, are decreasing. And yet the church is standing at the door to people who want to come to church. Like, I represent a portion of the gay community who identifies as Christian and just wants to be a part of the Christian church. And the church says no. Like, even strategically remove religion out of it. Like, what are we thinking when we're turning people away from the table who want to be there? I couldn't imagine Jesus doing something like that.
No. And that gives me chills when you just said that because I thought how horrible that would feel. And especially gay people in particular have had to deal with being not accepted. They haven't felt inclusive for even sometimes from their own families to come out and then to feel like they want to be also as people we like to be included in groups and to be part of something and to want to just pray to God and be part of a religious community and to be ostracized for that. I just find that to just not be godly and not be something that Jesus, like you said, would be okay with.
A lot of the time I do feel more agnostic than I do Christian. A lot of the time I do wonder, even as a Christian pastor, why I keep showing up when, like, even the current church I serve, we're part of a denomination where we still have to fight for them to acknowledge that I'm even a legitimate pastor. Um, and and yet, two things remain true. One, the church community saved me as a 12-year-old, suicidal, anxious, young, closeted gay man. And two, I've experienced what I understand to be the love of God, and that has given me a sense of hope in the darkest moments of my life. And I spend most of my time, I live a very gay life. I'm out in Hell's Kitchen here in New York City. I'm in the clubs, I'm in the bars, and I talk to a lot of gay folks who have this universal experience of saying, I want, as you just said, Mary, I want to be a part of a community where I can express my faith. And I just can't find it. And that's what motivates me to create the kind of community that I'm a part of and so many other progressive ministers are a part of, to say there are people who are craving a place to belong and to not have to have conversations every week about being gay. My church is LGBT inclusive, and we never talk about being LGBT at our church because the folks don't want to. They just want to be a part of community and to pray and to worship. And if I can help create that space for folks, especially, and the way I talk about church is that I'm not trying to grow a church to become a mega church. I want the church to be a place where people come in and heal. And then if they leave and go do yoga on Sunday mornings instead, great. But if we can be a stop on their way of healing from the trauma that religion has caused to them, that's what I think we should be doing as progressive and inclusive churches. And that's what I'm trying to do each week as a pastor.
That's beautiful. That's actually very beautiful. Do you have any stories of like people that have come to your congregation that are interesting as far as like they've come and found so much, I'm sure so much joy, but anyone that comes to your mind that has something unique that has happened to them by coming to God and finding salvation?
Yeah. I mean, I was just talking about this week with some folks because it's a story that I have so many examples of. Folks in their 60s, men in their 60s usually, who have been married to women for their entire lives, have kids, have been a part of the conservative Christian world, and finally get to a point where their wives usually actually support them and saying, now is the time to stop living inauthentically. Now is the time to experience what you've been suppressing your entire life. And to watch people in a religious community first hear that God accepts them and loves them, even though they've suppressed that for 60 years. To welcome their family, even their wives who now become more like best friends rather than
Mhm.
spouses, and then to watch these men often kind of go into the second adolescence that so many gay folks have, where they get to be teenagers again and kind of experience the things that most heterosexual people get to experience in their teenage years. It's actually a beautiful thing to watch people both rediscover faith and rediscover the world that has been there for them that they've not believed they could ever access. And then again, like I said, to see families. The kids oftentimes usually come along and are excited to see dad or mom finally be themselves. Um, I have like 12 or 13 people over the past 8 years that I've walked with through that journey. And on one hand, it's heartbreaking to think that they've had to live their entire lives with this pressure from religion, usually, but also to get to a point with their spouses, usually, where they can say, now is the time to be authentic. I don't have to give up my faith to do this. I don't have to give up my family to do this. Um, it's truly one of the biggest, beautifulest demonstrations of grace and salvation, to use that word. Like, it's profound.
Wow. And in your what tell me about a little bit about your church. What kind of program do you have programs there? Do you just you have obviously you do scripture, you read scriptures on a Sunday church, is it that you have service?
Yeah. I mean, so the first church I pastored in San Diego was largely LGBT, a couple hundred people, and it was very contemporary and modern. The church now is pretty much the exact opposite. When I got here 3 years ago, it was a congregation of 15 people, 70 and above. And we're in the heart of Queens in New York City. But over the past couple of years, to see our community is very conservative, I should say. Like the churches, every other church in our neighborhood is anti-LGBT. And so
Wow.
to have this little traditional church on the corner in Queens start with a flag outside that says all are included, immigrants, women, disabled folks, LGBT folks, and then all of a sudden to start seeing diverse people come into our community. And this past Sunday, we just noticed that like we've grown 50% in the past year of people that are so diverse that would never be a part of a traditional church, but they're coming not because our music is the best, not because we have the most dynamic service in the world. Again, it's traditional. We have an organ and I read the Bible and preach. But people are longing for community to be accepted and to feel like they
Yeah.
can belong in. And that's what we're experiencing. And it's truly beautiful.
So one of the things I'm really interested in, and I know it's kind of backtracking, but the this conversion therapy that you went through, I mean, I know that that happens, and I know of friends, gay friends, that their family has tried to convert them. Like, this is just a phase you're going through. This is not real. You know, God will condemn you. I have a really good friend who happens to be of the Mennonite community, and it's been awful for him because his parents are so religious, and they've pretty much, left him because of it. But he couldn't even come out as gay because of their religious beliefs. But they've tried to conform him by themselves. But what is it like to be conformed in any other ways?
Yeah.
Like when you went to this Bible school.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I would want to say first and foremost, because people don't realize this, in every single city in the United States, and I would imagine also across Canada as well, conversion therapy is happening. And these are churches and clinical practices that tell queer people to come in and be healed from their sexuality. While every major psychological association in the world has condemned it as as a harmful and impossible practice to change someone's sexual orientation. It looks different. Mine was actually very mild. Like if you went and watched the movie Boy Erased on Netflix, like there's very extreme versions where people are sent off to camps and are made to watch straight porn and like all sorts of crazy things that are meant to
I
help.
wondered if they were going to have them watch porn. Like, this is what you're supposed to like right here.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Oh,
mean, some people do. Mine was I met with an ex-lesbian professor once a week, and what she would do is have me confess my lusts. So I would tell her anytime I thought lustfully about another man, and then we would, which is weird, we would use holy water and a crucifix, which is not something Protestants do, and we would pray for the demonic forces that were causing me to like the same sex to be
it's like an
broken.
exorcism almost.
Yeah, weekly. Um, And the basic, all conversion therapy believes that people are gay because of trauma. And so the other side of it was going back through my childhood and thinking about traumatic moments with her and then praying for God to heal those moments. And that's what was so weird about it because it's actually a good thing to go back and process trauma. And so I did experience some like healing and it made me feel like, oh, maybe this is working because I'm talking through these things I've never talked with anybody about before. But after a year of sincerely trying, I did heal from a lot of my trauma, but what didn't change was my sexual orientation. And I earnestly tried. I had given 4 years of my life to studying to be a pastor, trying to be a straight conservative evangelical, and it didn't work. And that made me kind of have the revelation that perhaps the problem wasn't God wanted me to change, but my church wanted me to change, and I needed to stop trying to fit in with the church.
And where were your parents in all of this?
Yeah, they didn't. I mean, on one hand, my parents have always known I was gay. Just parents tend to know that kind of thing about their kid.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're not religious. So I actually think they liked me less when I was a conservative religious kid coming home and preaching to them. And once I finally came out as gay and became more progressive, I think they like me a lot better because I'm a much nicer person now than I was when I was telling them they were going to hell.
I'm going to read it because I love the dedication that you put in the beginning of the book. Dedicated to all the queer people who have ever been on the receiving end of bigotry and abuse at the hands of someone holding a Bible. May this book help you to reclaim your power and know deep in your bones that you are beloved by God, just as you are. That's powerful.
Yeah. And that's not just a message for queer people. I think that's the message that the church has failed to tell women. That's the message the church has failed to tell people of color for years. That's the message the church continues to fail to tell so many people. And that's why I'm a Christian, because I believe that message of God's unconditional love can give hope, can heal our traumas, can give us a purpose in life. And if I can help queer folks with this book or anything I'm doing know that they're loved by God, even though the church tells them they're not, if I can help anybody know they're loved by God, even though the church tells them they're not, that can be a transformative and healing thing because it's been for me. And yeah,
Yeah, because again, like what I said very early on was just Jesus loves everyone. And at the end of the day, you are made in the likeness of God. And and at the end of the day, you will go up to heaven and you'll be judged there. You won't be judged. You shouldn't be judged here. Who are we to have any authority to do that judging?
yeah. And the good news is I'm what they call a Christian universalist. And it's because I see the love of God is enough to transform everyone's heart, which means I think you mentioned this early on in our talk. I believe everyone, regardless of religion, race, background, gender, sexuality, we all will be reunited with God. And God's judgment is not to cast anyone away. God's judgment
Hmm.
is to restore, to heal, to reunite everyone with God's self. And that's something the church still doesn't teach, Protestant and Catholic, which seems to be, to me, the heart of the message of Jesus. All of us are going to be reunited with God and healed of any of the brokenness we've experienced in our lives.
And Jesus also said, I am with you always. And that, I've always felt if I can't make it to church on Sunday, I can sit right on my bed or in bed and I can pray and Jesus is going to hear me. Like I don't, I feel it's wonderful to be in a community and go to a church and I enjoy that so much and I get so much out of it. But I also know I am with you always.
Mm,
And so Jesus is living within all of us.
yeah.
And so I think that message in itself is not an organized message. I mean, it's just what Jesus said. And for you to be a pastor in a church and just talking about the words of Jesus and reading the words of Jesus in the scriptures is to me not really as much organized religion as what
Sure.
I'm kind of considering to be organized religion. I just think it's one way or the highway for a lot of
Yeah.
different institutions.
That's the beauty of the kind of world we live in today, that we all have access to so many different spiritual paths and so many different ways to connect with God that I'm with you. Like, there are Sundays that I'm off from my church and I'm at the queer Jewish synagogue down the road, or I'm at the Buddhist meditation center because I don't believe God is limited to my version of Christianity. And I want to experience the fullness of God in the areas that I might be blind to. And I think
I
that's just,
love that. I love that you do that. When my kids were little, I would take them to all the different churches. We did the same. We went to the Buddhist temple and they try to steal the oranges from they give the oranges to the statues. They put all the kids would try to grab them. I go, no, you can't grab the oranges. It's like, no, don't leave them.
yeah,
But one of the things that I know that you can give so much advice is to people who are struggling, people listening to this right now or will listen to this. I'm sure many of them, as far as my fan base goes or my followers, a lot are in the LGBT community, and I feel like a lot are struggling to find their faith. What kind of advice would you give to them to where to begin?
yeah. I mean, the thing that I think a lot of folks, because progressive religious people are so bad at marketing, people don't realize
Yeah.
that there is a huge movement that virtually every mainline Protestant denomination and many Catholic churches in cities across our country have taken fully LGBT inclusive stances. That's not to say most churches are LGBT inclusive, but a lot are and more are becoming. And so there are websites like gaychurch.net that have databases of 100,000 churches and community centers across the country that are just safe spaces to step into and begin re engaging your faith. But to the point that you have already brought up so beautifully, I don't recommend that all LGBT people immediately try going back to church because I recognize that can be very trauma inducing and triggering for people. But
Mm.
we do live in a world where there are resources and communities online. There are here in New York City, the LGBT Community Center has meditation groups and things like that. There are ways that you can begin to softly re engage your faith. But the last thing I would say is don't feel the need to defend your existence. So many people will read a book like mine or look at my content and think that I think LGBT people should be out there debating with their conservative family members about whether they are sinful or not. Debating has never changed anyone's heart or mind. All you need to do is live out your life as a full and whole person. And people who are antagonistic towards you will see that, and that will change their hearts and minds. No debate, no Bible interpretation, nothing will ever change somebody. And you don't need to spend your energy trying to convince people. Live your best life, live a holy and healthy life, connect to the communities that give you life. And that will bring about change for yourself and for others rather than feeling like you need to constantly fit in and justify yourself to those who think that we are sinful and broken. But also, there's like an organization called the Q Christian Fellowship that's been around for 20 years. They do a conference every year that brings about 5,000 LGBT Christians together in a room to connect with each other. And they have online communities as well. So, like, stuff is happening in this movement. I would say God is changing the hearts and minds of people in this moment, and there are spaces. If you want to connect with Christianity, it exists. If you want to connect with Islam, I know a handful of queer imams. And again, something's happening in this moment of history where there are, I go to a Zen Buddhist temple led by two husbands here in New York City, and there are queer mosques, and there are churches, and there are temples. And so the question is, it's about doing a little bit of the research to find where those spaces are. And that does take some work. But if you're interested, it exists and there are ways for you to connect.
Well, Reverend, tell us a little bit about your latest book coming out. It's coming out in May,
Yeah.
and I'd love you to tell us just a little bit about that book, as opposed to, what this is a new book, and what is the message in this book that you're conveying?
Yeah. Thank you. Queer and Christian is supposed to be different than so many of the other books that have come out in the last 10 years, which are just here's why the Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality. That's important. But I've moved on beyond that in my own life, and I know many LGBT people have moved beyond that conversation to what does it mean to just be fully who we are and to embrace Christian faith. And that means thinking about sexual ethics, meaning, lots of relationships don't fit two people together in a marriage for a lifetime. And so I explore how the Bible has different ways of relational configurations that can be healthy and good. We explore different characters that exist in the Bible that actually are not gender conforming or experience same sex love. It's really meant to be a tool for people to see the Bible, to see Christianity in a queer light, in a new way, that can be used both to empower and heal us, but also to defend ourselves against this moment. I don't even need to mention it, where Christian nationalism and right wing Christians are using this very book and this very religion to hurt so many people. If we can
Mm.
take the Bible back and say, actually, we're going to use it for liberation and healing and authenticity, I hope this book can empower some folks to have the tools to be able to do that. So,
And we are going to give away, you're so gracious to let us give away one of your books to a lucky subscriber. I'm really looking forward to getting a copy of it as well.
yes.
And I love what you're doing, and I think everybody, it's very courageous, and I think that you're a hero for this cause. And I know you're also known as the TikTok pastor. Is that true?
Yes. If TikTok still exists by the time this comes out, we'll
You
see.
never know, right? But I love that. So you must have gotten you must get on social media a lot of people who come to you who feel like they have questions or they feel they find some hope in what you're saying because being online is a way of people being able to have their anonymity and be able to talk to someone about things that are not of the norm.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And it's been the most fulfilling part of being on TikTok. There's a lot of downsides to it, but the best side has been connecting with thousands upon thousands of people around the world, many in countries where it is illegal to be gay, who are saying, can you just talk to me? Can you help me think through this? And it's been the greatest honor of the work I get to do. And I'm so grateful to get to do it every single day.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I've absolutely loved it. And I just want them to know that there's hope and that go to Jesus and feel like nothing really matters other than Jesus at the end of the day. And some people can say whatever they want about you, but they have no right to judge.
Yeah.
And live your life, live in faith, walk in faith and be who you are, as you said in the dedication to your book.
Yeah. Mary, I think you're a preacher. If you ever want a pulpit, come out to my church. This is amazing.
Well, you know what? Thank you so much. I would love to come and see you. Next time I'm in New York, I will definitely be coming and knocking on your church doors.
Amazing. It'd be great to see you. And thank you again for having me. It's been such an honor.
Thank you.
A very merry commentary.